Hey, everyone, welcome to Radio 28. Alright, so today we're diving into this germ. Think of it like a nasty seed scattered by the devil himself. Now, it's not super contagious, and it doesn't have a crazy high kill rate. Plus, we've had a vaccine for it for like a century. But here's the kicker: if someone weaponizes this thing, it becomes the ultimate nightmare fuel. Seriously, if it's not the absolute worst of the worst, then nothing is. So, this stuff is called anthrax. Back in the 1940s, when the Nazis were running wild across Europe and Asia, scientists in Britain were hiding out in bomb shelters. That's when Churchill's secret mission landed at a place called Portondown. He ordered the scientists to fire up this old World War I base, a place that was basically a bioweapons lab. They got to work and quickly zeroed in on anthrax as their new weapon of choice. They even figured out how to make it into a bomb. Then, this biologist, a Dr. Paul Fields, comes along and lays out 3 options for Churchill. Option 1, they load up planes with anthrax bombs and just drop them all over German cities, turning them into ghost towns for decades. Option 2, if they can't get planes over the cities, they could detonate the bombs upwind and let the wind do the dirty work. Option 3, if you want to avoid civilian casualties and really mess with the German war machine, is to target their livestock. That would cripple their food supply and really demoralize the troops. The idea was that if German troops started getting sick after eating their rations, fear would spread like wildfire. They'd be forced to go vegetarian, which would totally mess with their morale. Churchill ultimately chose option 3. Churchill went with this plan and called it Operation Vegetarian. He gave 2 orders: first, keep it super secret and get it done fast. Second, test the anthrax bombs to see how powerful they were. So, the guys at Portondown split up. One team started testing the bombs, while the other began working on the plan. They whipped up 5 million anthrax-laced biscuits, the kind of thing cows love to munch on. Spreading these around German-occupied pastures was way smarter than just dropping bombs. By spring 1944, they had 5 million biscuits ready and 12 Royal Air Force bombers all tricked out and ready to go. They were just waiting for Churchill's word. The Portondown guys gave him the final report: the planes could reach their targets in 18 minutes, and those 5 million biscuits would be scattered across German-held territory, especially around their livestock farms back in Germany. But Churchill ended up scrapping Operation Vegetarian. Turns out, the guy in charge of testing the anthrax bombs also gave Churchill some seriously unsettling news. They'd tested this particular anthrax weapon, codenamed 14578, on a little island called Gruinard. And let me tell you, this stuff was way too powerful. Those 5 million biscuits weren't just packed with anthrax, they were like 5 million little seeds of pure evil. If they'd unleashed that stuff on Europe, the contamination would have lasted for at least 100 years. For centuries, basically no person or animal could have survived in those areas. So, they say that after the British government bought this uninhabited island called Gruinard from its owner, they started planning this test. A meteorologist, Sir Oliver Graham Sutton, was in charge of a 50-person team, and a guy named David Henderson was in charge of the anthrax bombs. Then, they brought 60 to 80 sheep to the island and split them into groups, covering them with cloth to avoid cross-contamination. That's when the testing started. They dropped these 30-pound bombs that exploded into a cloud of deadly dust, which drifted over the animals. 3 days later, the sheep started dying. You could tell an animal had died from anthrax by the swollen body with massive bleeding. After that, they carefully disposed of the bodies. The scientists burned them and even used explosives to blow up a cliff to cover the remains to control the contamination. Then, some soldiers and scientists went to the island and got infected, too. Just from that one test, the island was contaminated, and the initial cleanup failed. After that, the island was abandoned. After World War II, Gruinard Island was considered too contaminated to live on, so the British government banned people from going there indefinitely. Even though people thought the island would only stay like that for 10 years, the anthrax levels didn't go down. In 1981, a terrorist group used the anthrax-contaminated soil from the island to carry out a terrorist attack against public officials. This operation, called Operation Dark Harvest, started with sending messages to British newspapers, calling on the government to decontaminate the island. These letters were related to the Gruinard Island anthrax contamination incident. The senders revealed to the public the secret anthrax experiments conducted by the British government on Gruinard Island in 1942. The appearance of these anonymous letters drew public attention to the Gruinard Island anthrax contamination incident. The media widely reported on this matter, forcing the British government to re-examine the Gruinard Island contamination issue and ultimately decide to take measures to purify the island. Under public pressure, the British government began decontamination work on Gruinard Island in 1986. Soil samples taken in 1979 showed that even after nearly 40 years, there were still 3,000 to 45,000 spores per gram of soil. There were all sorts of ideas about what to do with the island, like covering the whole thing in concrete, or digging up the topsoil and dumping it in the North Atlantic. Finally, the scientists did a thorough survey of the island, checking out the soil, plants, and water to see how bad the contamination was and where it was. Then they completely sealed off the island. Before the cleanup started, nobody could go there, no people, no animals. They wanted to make sure everything was safe. The cleanup crews used a disinfectant, like formaldehyde, to clean up the buildings, the soil, and the plants. The idea was to kill all the anthrax bacteria. They carefully removed the contaminated soil and plants and disposed of them safely, so the contamination wouldn't spread. After the cleanup, the scientists kept an eye on the island for a long time, taking samples and testing them regularly to make sure all the anthrax was gone. In 1990, after 48 years of isolation and 4 years of cleanup, the ban on the island was finally lifted, and it was reopened. That same year, the original owner bought the island back for £500, just like they agreed. So, why didn't the British government take care of this land right away? Well, let's take a look at this urban legend. Back in 1942, before the experiment, the scientists cleared everyone off Gruinard Island. The military had 3 warships and 300 soldiers standing by to help with the experiment. After it was over, the scientists and soldiers went onto the island. They just did a quick job of getting rid of the sheep carcasses, burying them near the shoreline, but just a day later, the soldiers and experts who buried the sheep started dropping like flies. When the rescue team went to the island, they quickly got infected too. That's when everyone realized they had seriously underestimated how deadly this anthrax weapon was. Gruinard Island had turned into a living hell. Going there meant certain death. The warships didn't have the right vaccines, so sending more people to rescue the first team would have been suicide. But if they let the rescue team come back to the ships, they'd be releasing a deadly plague that was basically trapped on the island. And if that plague got back to the mainland, who knows what would happen? So, the soldiers on the warships just had to watch helplessly as the rescue team on the island died a slow and agonizing death. So, let's get clear on what anthrax is. Anthrax infections happen in nature all the time, but they mostly harm livestock. In 2016, there was an anthrax outbreak in the Yamal-Nenets Autonomous Okrug in Siberia, Russia. A lot of reindeer died because of it. People think it happened because of a heat wave that melted the permafrost, which exposed anthrax bacteria that had been frozen for a long time. Over 2,600 reindeer died, and 36 people got infected. One of them, a kid, even died. The Russian government took immediate action, like quarantining the infected people, burning the dead animals, and vaccinating everyone else to stop the disease from spreading. So, yeah, anthrax has been around for a while. We've actually had vaccines for it since the late 1800s. Louis Pasteur, the famous French scientist, developed the first one way back in 1881. But here's the thing, why is it still such a scary thing, even in World War II and even today? It's all because of what humans did with it. They turned anthrax into a weapon. Anthrax is a nasty bug, and we've known about it for a long time. The most common type of infection you'll see in nature is cutaneous anthrax. That's about 95% of cases. It usually happens when people mess with animals or their stuff, like hides, wool, or meat. The anthrax bacteria gets into your body through cuts or scrapes, even tiny ones you might not even notice. That's why people who work with livestock or animal products are the ones who usually get it. If you get cutaneous anthrax, you'll see these nasty black sores on your skin. Now, if you don't get treatment, you've got about a 20% chance of dying from it, which is still pretty serious. But if you catch it early and get the right treatment, your chances of survival go way up. Fun fact, even though the Old Testament doesn't specifically mention black sores, some of the stuff it talks about, and some of the descriptions in old Egyptian and Chinese medical texts, might actually be talking about anthrax infections. If you've got gastrointestinal anthrax, which is pretty rare but also super dangerous, you get it from eating meat that's contaminated with anthrax bacteria, especially if it's not cooked properly. Once you swallow those bacteria, they start multiplying in your gut and release toxins that can really mess you up. If you don't get the right treatment, you've got a 25% to 75% chance of dying from it, which is why it's so important to be careful with food safety. But the scariest type of anthrax is when it's weaponized and becomes pulmonary anthrax. That's when you breathe in the anthrax spores. In nature, bacteria usually have 3 ways to survive. 1. Abandon toxicity and live in symbiosis with the host, like E. coli. 2. Reduce toxicity and increase infectivity, like the Black Death. 3. Enter a state of dormancy, spores. This is where things get really serious because anthrax has these nasty tricks up its sleeve. First, it can form spores, which are like tiny survival capsules that can live for a long, long time, even after the animal host dies. Think of it like this: the bacteria basically dehydrates itself, puts on this super strong shell, and goes into a kind of hibernation. It's like those aliens in that sci-fi book who can just dry themselves out and wait for things to get better. That's exactly what anthrax spores do. They've got this tough outer layer protecting their DNA and a little bit of protein. This shell is seriously hardcore. It can withstand crazy temperatures, high pressure, strong acids and bases, you name it. Regular disinfectants? Forget about it, they won't even scratch the surface. And here's the really scary part: these spores are tiny, like ridiculously tiny. You could pack over 1 trillion of them into just 1 gram of anthrax powder. That's why weaponizing anthrax is so dangerous. You can spread these tiny spores everywhere, and they can survive for decades, waiting for the perfect moment to come back to life and cause havoc. So, the second thing that makes anthrax so scary is its super strong poison. Think of it this way: when anthrax spores get into your lungs, when you breathe them in, they get swallowed up by these little immune cells in your lungs, called macrophages. Inside those cells, the spores wake up and turn back into the anthrax bacteria, ready to multiply. Now, if this happens on your skin or in your gut, your immune system can usually fight it off and keep it from spreading everywhere, especially with the help of antibiotics these days. You might still get sick, but you've got a decent chance of pulling through. But here's the kicker: when those spores go straight into your lungs, it's a whole different ball game. It's like they've got a VIP pass straight to your bloodstream. Once they're in your blood, they can spread throughout your whole body way too easily, and they start pumping out this incredibly powerful toxin that attacks all your organs. And get this, sometimes, it even tricks your immune system into attacking your own body. That's why pulmonary anthrax is so incredibly deadly. Like, if you don't get treatment right away, your chances of dying are over 80%. Even if you do get treatment, it's still a coin flip. You've still got about a 45% chance of not making it. It's seriously scary stuff. and here's the messed up part, the early symptoms of pulmonary anthrax are almost exactly like the flu. That means it's super easy for doctors to misdiagnose it and waste precious time, which is one of the big reasons why it's so deadly. And now, when you weaponize anthrax, you take all these nasty things and crank them up to 11. First, you breed anthrax bacteria that are extra good at making those toxins. Second, you create tons and tons of these tiny, dried-out anthrax spores that are perfect for breathing in. Third, you mix in stuff that keeps the spores from clumping together, so they float around in the air easier. Fourth, you add chemicals that make the spores less sticky, so they can travel even farther and deeper into people's lungs. So, basically, you take a regular anthrax bug and turn it into this supercharged killing machine that can sneak into your body undetected and unleash a world of hurt. It's like taking a seed that can barely grow in nature and turning it into a weapon of mass destruction. That's why anthrax is such a scary thing. It's not just a disease, it's a tool that people can use to cause unimaginable harm. That's probably why Churchill ultimately didn't let those bombers loaded with 5 million anthrax cakes take off. When it comes to using anthrax in war, there's really only one country that's actually done it, and that's Japan back in World War II. They had this super secret military unit called Unit 731, and they were supposed to be studying how to prevent diseases and clean up water. But really, they were doing some seriously messed up stuff, biological warfare, germ warfare, and experimenting on live people. These guys were using all sorts of people, Chinese, Russians, Koreans, for their horrible experiments. And they definitely used anthrax and plague bacteria to make weapons and then unleashed them on different places in China, killing tons of innocent people. So, after the war, people finally woke up and smelled the coffee. Biological weapons are seriously bad news. That's why they came up with the Biological Weapons Convention, basically a global agreement saying, nope, no more bioweapons. It officially went into effect in 1975, and now, over 180 countries have signed up. If you liked the video, hit that like button and subscribe. Let's keep the conversation going in the comments below. See you next time.